So I'm going to continue with the teachings of Ajahn Lee, the writings. So we were going through the refuges, and I went through Buddha and Dhamma, and he has a longer section on sangha. So we'll just see how far we get. And I'm also going to skip over a lot of the really long Pali terms and just read more of the descriptions. Sanghang saranang gacchami. I go to the sangha for refuge. The word sangha, if translated as a substantive, refers to those who have ordained and are wearing the yellow robe. Translated as a quality, it refers to all people in general who have practiced correctly in line with the Buddha's teachings. Members of the monastic order, however, are of all sorts, and so we have two groups: the Sammuti Sangha, the conventional Sangha, and the Arya Sangha, the noble Sangha. Membership in the conventional Sangha is attained through consent of the order in a formal ceremony with witnesses following the procedures set out in the Vinaya. Membership in the noble Sangha is attained when the quality of transcendence, or Lokuttara Dhamma, appears in one's heart as a result of one's own behavior and practice, with no formalities of any sort whatsoever. All Buddhists, whether formally ordained or not, no matter what their gender, color, or social position, can become members of this Sangha. This is termed being ordained by the Dhamma, or being self-ordained in a way that cannot be faulted. To speak in terms of qualities, the qualities of transcendence, stable and sure, that appear in the hearts of those who practice, leading them solely to good destinations and closing off the four states of destitution, are, taken together, called the Noble Sangha. Members of the conventional Sangha, with regard to the way they conduct themselves, fall into four groups. 1. Those who become ordained simply because they're looking for ways to make a living, without searching for any higher virtues to develop within themselves. They use the yellow robe as a means of livelihood, without any thought of following the threefold training of virtue, concentration, and discernment. 2. Those who become ordained without any respect for the training, looking simply for pastimes for their own enjoyment, collecting plants, playing chess, gambling, buying lottery tickets, betting on horses. These are things actually in the Vinaya. Looking for gain in ways forbidden by the Vinaya, disobeying the words of the Buddha, disregarding the virtues he promulgated, undermining the religion. 3. Those who are closed-minded and misguided, unwilling to train themselves in heightened virtue, concentration, or discernment. Even though they may have some education and knowledge, they still keep themselves closed-minded, making excuses based on their teachers, the time, the place, and their accustomed beliefs and practices. Stuck where they are, such people are unwilling to change their ways so as to accord with the principles of the Dhamma. 4. Those who desire what's meritorious and skillful, who search for the true principles of Dhamma and Vinaya, who set their hearts on studying with reverence and respect, and conduct themselves in line with what they have learned, who aim for the merit and skillfulness offered by Buddhism, for the path leading to release from suffering, who rightly follow the Buddha's teachings, i.e., they don't berate others in inappropriate ways, they aren't vindictive or violent to others, and they stay well within the precepts of the Patimokkha and don't disobey the training rules of the Vinaya, like good citizens desired by the nation who stay within the bounds of the government's laws. If people don't keep within the laws of the land, it will lead only to turmoil, because people who have no bounds are like farmers who have no boundary markers and who will thus infringe on one another's property, giving rise to needless disputes and ill feeling, serving no purpose whatsoever. They have a sense of moderation in searching for and using the four necessities of life. They understand how to make the best use of things, knowing what's beneficial and what's harmful, what is and what isn't of use to the body, considering things carefully before making use of them, in line with the principles of morality and the Buddha's teachings. They favor quiet, secluded places to stay. To quote from the canon, these include going to a forest wilderness, far from human society, free from social interaction, or to uninhabited dwellings in places far off the beaten track, or living under the shade of a tree, in a cave, or under an overhanging cliff face, so as to aid the heart in attaining concentration. They make a persistent effort through the practice of concentration to cleanse the heart, freeing it from such hindrances as sensual desire. All of these factors are the teachings of the Buddhas. How can a person who harms himself and others be a good monk? These then are the attributes of the sangha. In broad terms, they come down to two sorts. Sangha nimitta, the symbol of having been ordained, i.e. the mode of dress, etc. Or guna sampatti, the inner qualifications, virtue and truth, of those worthy meditators who are held to be the field of merit for the world. Those with the necessary resources, i.e. discernment, will obtain a good field. Whatever seed they plant will give a yield well worth the effort involved, just as an intelligent person who puts his savings in a safe national bank will protect his capital from loss and even earn a profit. Just as a good rice field has 4 characteristics: the ground is level and even, the dike has a water gate that is easy to open and close, the soil is rich in nutrients, the rainfall comes at the proper season. In the same way, members of the sangha who are to be a field of merit for the world have to be endowed with the 4 following qualities. 1. The analogy of level, even ground refers to those monks who are free from the 4 forms of personal bias. Whatever they do in thought, word, and deed, they are free from. And this was covered under the section on the Buddha a couple days ago, so we'll go over it again because they're important. Chandagati, these are the 4 agatis, the 4 biases. Chandagati, they don't act solely under the power of their own likes and inclinations. Dosagati, or under the power of ill will or anger toward others. Mohagati, or under the power of delusion. Abhayagati, under the power of fear or apprehension of any sort whatsoever. They aim at what is right and true as their major concern, both in the presence of others and in private, keeping themselves always on a par with their principles. 2. As for the analogy of a water gate that is easy to open and close, closing refers to exercising restraint so that evil doesn't arise within us. Restraint has 4 aspects. Patimokkha sangwara sila, staying within the bounds of the patimokkha. Indriya sangwara sila, this is something you'll hear in Thailand all the time if you go. It's Insi Sangwon in Thai. Exercising restraint over our senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling, and ideation, so as to keep the mind quiet, unagitated, and in good order. Ajiva parisuddhi sila, searching for the necessities of life, food, clothing, shelter, and medicine, only in ways that are proper. Pachaya pachawekana parisuddhi sila, considering the necessities of life before using them so as not to use them out of craving. That's the patisankha yoniso, the chant we do. To exercise restraint in these ways is called closing. Closing, however, can be understood in another way, i.e., exercising restraint so that corruption doesn't arise in the 3 areas of our thoughts, words, and deeds. To close or control our deeds means, in broad terms, not to kill living beings or to oppress or torment them in any way, not to steal the belongings of others, not to engage in sexual misconduct, or to give rein to any sensual defilements. Even though such defilements may arise in the heart, we keep them under control. This is what it means to close our deeds. To close our words means not to tell lies, either to other people's faces or behind their backs, not to speak divisively, i.e., in a way that would lead to a needless falling out between people, not to speak coarsely or abusively, not cursing, swearing, or being vulgar, and not to engage in useless chatter, saying things that are of no real use to ourselves or our listeners. To be intent on restraining ourselves in this way is called closing off evil words so they don't have a chance to arise. To close off evil thoughts means refraining from the greed that goes above and beyond our sphere and powers to the point where dissatisfaction defiles the mind. Not storing up feelings of ill will to the point where strong anger takes over and we let envy and jealousy show. And keeping our views correct in line with right principles, eliminating wrong views that arise from the mind's being clouded and untrained, i.e., overpowered by ignorance and delusion, to the point of believing that there is no good or evil, and from there to deeply ingrained unskillful mental states. When we take care to ward off these unskillful mental qualities so that they can't arise in our hearts, they will give way to right view, seeing that there really is good, there really is evil, that virtue, generosity, and meditation really give good results, that the paths and fruitions leading to Nibbana really exist. When we see things in this way, we have in effect closed off evil, preventing it from penetrating our hearts, just as rice farmers close their dikes to prevent salt water from flowing into their fields. As for opening, it refers to practicing the 5 forms of unselfishness. Not being possessive of the place over which we have control, such as our temple or monastery. Not preventing good people from coming to stay. If people are pure in their behavior and able to impart what is good to us, we should give up our space to make room for them so that they can stay in comfort. Evil people, however, shouldn't be allowed to infiltrate our group, and bad people who are already in the group should be expelled. This is how to behave with discernment in this area. Not being possessive of our families. On the external level, this refers to the families who support us. We don't prevent them from making offerings to other individuals, and we don't prevent capable individuals from teaching and advising them. Some monks stand in the way of such interchanges, creating barriers with their thoughts, words, and deeds. Sometimes if their supporters make merit with other individuals, they even make reprisals, such as refusing to allow that family to make merit with their own groups or factions. These unskillful attitudes shouldn't be allowed to rise in our hearts. This is on the external level. On the internal level, being possessive of our family refers to the heart's attachment to sensations and mental acts, which form the family line of unawakened people. We should abandon this attachment so that we can enter the lineage of the noble ones. And not being possessive of the material gains we have attained through proper means, not regarding them as being our own. Material gains, as classified by the Vinaya, are of 4 sorts: food, clothing, shelter, meaning lodgings and the items used in them, such as furniture, matting, etc., and medicine. We should see that when people present us with offerings of this sort, they have abandoned an enemy, their own stinginess and selfishness, and have gained in merit and skillfulness through the power of their sacrifice. Anyone who receives such an offering and clings to it as really being their own is like a person who collects coconut pulp or sugarcane pulp from which others have already squeezed and drunk the juice. For this reason, people of wisdom and discernment aren't possessive of their belongings and don't really see them as their own. They're always willing to relinquish and share their gains in proportion to the amount they have received, so that others can make use of them. This is external relinquishment. As for internal relinquishment, whereas we once ate as we liked, many times a day, we now eat less, only 1 meal a day. We use only 1 set of robes. We relinquish our comfortable lodgings and undertake the ascetic practice of living in the forest or under the shade of a tree. If we become ill, we search for medicine and treat our disease with moderation, in a way that doesn't create burdens for others. In other words, we relinquish ourselves as an offering to the religion by putting it into practice. This is classed as the internal relinquishment of material gain through the power of our practice and conduct. And not being possessive of our color, wanna. Wanna here has been interpreted in 2 senses. In one sense, it refers to social caste or class. For example, the ruling class, the religious elite, property owners, and laborers are held to be unequal in status, and the members of one group are unwilling to let other groups mix with theirs. If such mixing occurs, they regard it as something base and disgraceful, and so they continually put up barriers to prevent it from happening. In this sense, we can infer that we shouldn't make distinctions based on faction, nationality, color, or race, because the Buddha taught that a person's worth comes not from his or her birth, but from the goodness of his or her own actions. Or, as we say, those who do good will meet with good, those who do evil will meet with evil. For example, we at present worship and respect the Buddha, even though he wasn't Thai as we are. We respect him through the power of his goodness. If we were to be closed-minded and nationalistic, we Thais wouldn't have any religion to worship at all, aside from the religion of spirits and ghosts. The second sense of vana refers to the complexion of our skin. This, too, we cling to, unwilling to sacrifice it for what is meritorious and skillful. We hesitate to observe the precepts, to meditate, or to undertake the ascetic practices, for fear that will spoil our looks and complexion. Dhammamacharya, not being possessive of the Buddha's teachings we have learned. Possessiveness, in this case, can mean not wanting to teach unless we are reimbursed, not wanting to preach unless there is an offering, or complaining if the offering is small. On another level, being possessive of the Dhamma can refer to holding on to the unskillful qualities within us, being unwilling to rid ourselves of such evils as greed, anger, delusion, pride, conceit, or any of the other fermentations of defilement, clinging to these things without searching for the techniques called the path for relinquishing them, i.e., the precepts of the Patimokkha that, if we observe them carefully, can eliminate the common defilements arising through our words and deeds. The practice of concentration that, when developed in our hearts, can eliminate intermediate defilements, such as hindrances as sensual desire. The discernment that, when it arises within us, can eliminate such subtle defilements from our hearts as avijja, mental darkness, tanha, craving, and upadana, clinging to false assumptions that defile the mind. When we develop these five forms of unselfishness, we can be classed as open, and our eyes will be open to perceiving the highest quality, the transcendent. 3. The analogy of soil rich in nutrients refers to our putting 4 qualities into practice. 1. Metta, goodwill, friendliness, hoping for our own happiness and well-being, and for that of all other living beings. 2. Karuna, compassion for ourselves and others, which induces us to be helpful in various ways. 3. Mudita, empathetic joy for ourselves for having cultivated goodness. Empathetic joy, not feeling jealousy, for the goodness cultivated by others. 4. Upekkha, equanimity in cases beyond our control. For instance, when death has come to a person we know, we see that it's beyond our help, and so we keep our hearts neutral, not allowing feelings of sadness or gladness to arise. For these 4 qualities to arise in fully mature form, they have to appear in our thoughts, words, and deeds. Whatever we may do in thought, word, or deed should not be done through the power of anger. We should regard anger as an ogre, and when anger takes over, our body becomes an ogre's tool, his bludgeon. To see the drawbacks of anger in this way can give rise to goodwill in thought, word, and deed, extending without partiality to all people and living beings throughout the world. Even with our enemies, we should try to develop these same thoughts of goodwill by looking for their good side in one way or another, instead of looking just at their bad side, which can cause hatred to invade and consume our hearts. Anger is a fire that can't burn other people. It burns only ourselves. This is why we should develop goodwill within our hearts. The power of goodwill brings good to everyone, just as food that contains the nutrients needed by people brings health and contentment to all who eat it, or as fertilizer with the proper nutrients can cause plants and trees to grow, flower, give fruit, and so be of use to people and other living beings. Goodwill is thus a form of goodness that can be classed as a nutrient. Goodwill is what cools the fevers of the world. The analogy of seasonable rain refers to our establishing ourselves in the 4 bases of success, the iddhipadas. 1. Chanda, feeling a love and affinity for goodness and virtue as much as for life, or more. 2. Virya, being persistent, audacious, and persevering in cultivating goodness within ourselves. 3. Chitta, being intent on whatever we set about to do. 4. Vimamsa, using appropriate attention, being discriminating and circumspect at all times in whatever we set about to do. These 4 qualities can lead to 2 kinds of success: success through the power of thought and success that comes on its own. Both of these forms of success, on the level of the world or the Dhamma, have to be based on the 4 qualities mentioned above. These 4 qualities are like preservatives. Whoever is saturated with them won't go sour or stale. And when we're free from going stale, our work is bound not to stagnate and so is sure to succeed. Another comparison. These 4 qualities are satya kamma, actions that give rise to truth, achieving our purposes. Those who bring these qualities into themselves will become true people. Truth can be compared to salt. If we try to keep food, like vegetables or fish, without salting it, it soon turns rotten and wormy, making it unfit for human consumption. But if we salt it, it can keep for a long time. A good example of this is our Lord Buddha, whose actions give rise to truth, and who thus was able to establish the religion so as to benefit people at large. Even the body he left behind still serves a purpose for human and divine beings. For instance, his bones, which have become relics, are still with us even though he gained total nibbana a long time ago. As for his teachings, they have lasted for more than 2,500 years, and he himself is deathless, i.e., he has entered total nibbana. All of this was achieved by means of truth, i.e., the 4 bases of success. Those of us who have no truth, though, are like unsalted fish or meat and are bound to go wormy. The worms here refer to our various defilements and are of 3 main species. The first species is composed of passion, aversion, and delusion. These feed on us from our feet to our waists. The second species, sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and anxiety, and uncertainty, latch on and bore into us from our waists to our necks. And the third species, the fermentations of sensuality, states of becoming, views, and ignorance, or cloudy, unclear knowledge, eat us up whole, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, body, and mind. Whoever is all worm-eaten like this is classed as a person gone rotten and stale, who hasn't reached any qualities of substance. And for this reason, the bones of such a person after death are no match for the bones of chickens and pigs, for no one wants them. If the bones and meat of such a person were put up for sale, no one would buy them. And furthermore, such a person will have to come back as an angry demon, lolling its tongue and rolling its eyes to frighten its children and grandchildren. So whoever develops the 4 qualities mentioned above will reach deathlessness, which is like a crystalline shower that comes from distilling away all impurities, just as rainwater, which is distilled from the sea, rises into the air and falls back on the earth, nourishing the grasses, crops, and trees, giving refreshment to people and other living beings. These, then, are some of the characteristics of those who form the field of merit for the world, both on the mundane and on the transcendent levels, who conduct themselves rightly in keeping with the phrase and the chant of the virtues of the sangha, Punya Ketang Lokasati, the field of merit for the world. Now we will discuss the chant of the virtues of the sangha further as a path to practice, because the virtues of the sangha are open to all Buddhists in general, without excluding any individual, race, or social class at all. Whoever puts these principles into practice is capable of becoming a member of the noble sangha within the heart, without having to go through the formalities of the Vinaya. In other words, This is a community and a state of worthiness in the area of the Dhamma, open to all who put the following principles into practice. 1. Supatipanno, being a person whose conduct is good. Good conduct refers to 7 principles. 1. We should gather frequently for the daily chanting services, to hear the Dhamma explained, to seek out wise people, and to join wholeheartedly in the work of the group. This is external gathering. What is really important, though, is internal gathering, i.e., collecting the mind in concentration, which is the gathering point of all that is good and forms the basic skill for bringing the factors of the path together. 2. When a meeting of the group disperses, we should all disperse at the same time and not act at variance with the group. On the internal level, we should all, as a group, disperse evil from our thoughts, words, and deeds. 3. We should neither establish new rules that were not established by the Buddha, nor abandon those that were. For example, don't make a practice of doing things the Buddha declared to be worthless, evil, or wrong. Develop within yourself the things he taught to be good, right, and worthwhile. 4. Be respectful of your elders, parents, teachers, etc. 5. Whatever you do in thought, word, or deed, don't act under the influence of craving, anger, or delusion. 6. Make a point of searching out virtuous people. And 7. Take pleasure in solitude. This is what is meant by good conduct, or supatipanno. 2. Ujjupatipanno, being a person whose conduct is straightforward, firmly established in the threefold training, virtue, concentration, and discernment, which leads straight to nibbana, being fair and just, unswayed by any of the 4 forms of personal bias. This is what is meant by straightforward conduct. 3. Nyayapatipanno, being a person whose conduct leads to higher knowledge. This refers to the following 15 procedures. And this is a whole list of different ways of conduct. So, keeping restrained within the precepts of the Patimokkha, respecting the training rules of the Vinaya. For lay people, this means observing the 5 or 8 precepts. Keeping watch over your senses of sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling, and ideation, so as to keep the mind properly collected and at peace. Knowing moderation in the requisites of life, i.e., eating only just enough food. Being persistent in cleansing the mind so that it is pure and bright, not allowing lapses in mindfulness or alertness to occur. Conviction, i.e., being convinced of the truth of good and evil, of the paths and their fruitions, having conviction in people who merit it. Then hiri and ottappa. Hiri, feeling shame at the thought of doing evil, not doing evil either in public or in private. Ottappa, having a sense of compunction at the thought of doing evil. Being well educated and always willing to listen and learn. Being persistent, unflagging, and courageous in performing your duties. Being mindful before doing anything in thought, word, or deed. Developing discernment as to what should and should not be done, as to what is and isn't beneficial. And then he goes into the 4 jhanas. The first jhana, composed of 5 factors: directed thought, evaluation, rapture, pleasure, and singleness of preoccupation. Jhana means to be absorbed in or focused on a single object of preoccupation, such as when we deal with the breath. The second jhana, composed of 3 factors: rapture, pleasure, and singleness of preoccupation. The third jhana, composed of 2 factors: pleasure and singleness of preoccupation. The fourth jhana, composed of 2 factors: equanimity and pure mindfulness, which is the single preoccupation of your concentration. This is what is meant by conduct leading to higher knowledge. And I'll read a little bit from Ajahn Chah. Just continuing on with a still forest pool. Ending doubt. Many people who have studied on a university level and attained graduate degrees and worldly success find that their lives are still lacking. Though they think high thoughts and are intellectually sophisticated, their hearts are still filled with pettiness and doubt. The vulture flies high, but what does it feed on? Dhamma is understanding that goes beyond the conditioned, compounded, limited understanding of worldly science. Of course, worldly wisdom can be used to good purpose, but progress in worldly wisdom can cause deterioration in religion and moral values. The important thing is to develop supramundane wisdom that can use such technology while remaining detached from it. It is necessary to teach the basics first: basic morality, seeing the transitoriness of life, the facts of aging and death. Here is where we must begin. Before you drive a car or ride a bicycle, you must learn to walk. Later, you may ride in an airplane or travel around the world in a blink of an eye. Outward, scriptural study is not important. Of course, the Dhamma books are correct, but they are not right. They cannot give you right understanding. To see the word hatred in print is not the same as experiencing anger, just as hearing a person's name is different from meeting them. Only experiencing for yourself can give you true faith. There are two kinds of faith. One is a kind of blind trust in the Buddha, the teachings, the master, which often leads one to begin to practice or to ordain. The second is true faith, certain, unshakable, which arises from knowing within oneself. Though one still has other defilements to overcome, seeing clearly all things within oneself makes it possible to put an end to doubt, to attain this certainty in one's practice. And I'll end with this one: go beyond words, see for yourself. In my own practice, I did not know or study much. I took the straightforward teachings the Buddha gave and simply began to study my own mind according to nature. When you practice, observe yourself. Then gradually, knowledge and vision will arise of themselves. If you sit in meditation and want it to be this way or that, you had better stop right there. Do not bring ideals or expectations to your practice. Take your studies, your opinions, and store them away. You must go beyond all words, all symbols, all plans for your practice. Then you can see for yourself the truth arising right here. If you do not turn inward, you will never know reality. I took the first few years of formal Dhamma text study, and when I had the opportunity, I went to hear various scholars and masters teach, until such study became more of a hindrance than a help. I did not know how to listen to their sermons, because I had not looked within. The great meditation masters spoke about the truth within oneself. Practicing, I began to realize that it existed in my own mind as well. After a long time, I realized that these teachers have really seen the truth, and that if we follow their path, we will encounter everything they have spoken about. Then we will be able to say, yes, they were right. What else could there be? Just this. When I practiced diligently, realization unfolded like that. If you are interested in Dhamma, just give up, just let go. Merely thinking about practice is like pouncing on the shadow and missing the substance. You need not study much. If you follow the basics and practice accordingly, you will see the Dhamma for yourself. There must be more than merely hearing the words. Speak just with yourself. Observe your own mind. If you cut off this verbal thinking mind, you will have a true standard for judging. Otherwise, your understanding will not penetrate deeply. Practice in this way and the rest will follow. Okay, any questions or comments? We have a few minutes. Day 3. It's hard to ask questions after listening to Luang Por Chah, I always found. Anything else is just kind of pales in comparison. It's kind of saying, consider things in this way and you won't have any more questions. Any questions? He usually talks about, Ajahn Lee usually talks about equanimity in terms of letting go of things that are out of our control. So where he talks about the 4 Brahma Viharas, he says, Upekkha, equanimity in cases beyond our control. For instance, when death has come to a person we know, we see that it's beyond our help, And so we keep our hearts neutral, not allowing feelings of sadness or gladness to arise. Was that what you were referring to? Yeah, there's certain nuance to it, because equanimity comes about through the reflection that something is beyond our control. And so with true equanimity, like for an Aryan, yes, the heart would remain neutral in terms of, but that refers to the Arhat. So like when the Buddha was about to attain parinibbana, you had the stream enterers kind of bawling and crying, and then you had the Arhants just in a state of equanimity, kind of not, those types of emotions weren't arising. So yeah, if one isn't at that level, it's natural that those things will arise. So I believe Ajahn Lee is talking about the ultimate level of equanimity here. Not where you're callously saying, like, I don't feel anything, I'm going to be neutral because my parents just passed away. It doesn't, that's the correct way to practice. And then just denying that you're feeling grief or sadness. So it doesn't mean to repress them, but it means when you truly see that something is out of your control, then yes, the heart will remain neutral. But it's certainly not repressing or trying to control it. And with gladness as well. So like, I think it's connected with the teaching of Longpa Liam yesterday. He was talking all about praise and criticism, how we can get carried away by praise as well. And so if we think, there is a very interesting teaching. It is the Majjhima Nikaya 50, the Rebuke to Mara, one of my favorite suttas. Anybody here can look into it. It's previous Buddha, and Mahamoggallana is talking about his previous incarnation as Mara. And so where Mara infects the minds of the villagers to try to get the sangha to lose their concentration. So when the sangha is on alms round, he infects the minds of the villagers with weaker minds. He infects their minds to criticize the sangha, calling them all sorts of names. And then the monks go back to talk to the Buddha about it. Again, this is our previous Buddha, a very long time ago. And the Buddha says, monks, when they criticize you, reflect on goodwill, reflect on metta when they criticize you in this way. And that keeps their minds in balance. And then Mara says, okay, well, that didn't work. I have to try something else. So then he infects the minds of the villagers to lavish praise on the sangha and like telling them how wonderful they are and giving them more offerings than normal. And then the monks go back and tell the Buddha about this and wonder what they should do. And the Buddha says, monks, reflect on impermanence when they do this to you. When you receive praise, reflect on impermanence. So these two different reflections. When you receive criticism, reflect on metta. When you receive praise, reflect on impermanence. I think that's brilliant. So, that we can also remain in equanimity when we get praised, and we may be deserving of praise even, but then saying, well, this can change very quickly, and there's many dangers in getting infatuated with this kind of thing. And making sure we're not doing our actions for the sake of praise, just doing something just so people praise us. Or just doing something just so people criticize us. I've seen this before as well. That's called the everybody hates me and I don't care approach.